Okay, I think we've got a bit of a lapse in the new people dropping into the session, so I think we might make a beginning. Welcome everybody to the Goulburn Catchment information session. And I'd like, on behalf of the presenters, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we all meet today, and acknowledge and pay respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders and other participants attending today's webinar. Just like to begin by introducing myself as well. I'm the Director of Community at Greater Shepparton City Council. I've been heavily involved in the response locally here in Greater Shepparton to the October 2022 flood event and the subsequent recovery effort as well. So I'll be chairing today's session and would like to extend a very sincere thanks to my Goulburn Murray Water colleagues for inviting me to be involved today. We've put this session together today because we know that there is a real need in our community at the moment for really factual, up-to-date information about the current conditions and any potential that might exist for the future flood risks. So many people in our community are very understandably nervous or anxious at the moment that we could be at risk of future flooding so soon after really what was a very traumatic event last October. So today is really all about answering that question as simply and as factually as we can. And there's one simple question that most people who attend one of our in-person sessions or a webinar like this really want to have answered, and that is, are we going to experience any further major flooding in 2023? And the answer, collectively as simple as we can make it, is really that the odds are lengthening now that the forecast dry weather has kicked in, starting to be quite evident in the community with the sun out and the rain really dropping away. But we're probably not completely out of the woods yet, and we're watching the weather very closely because that's the variable that's most in play at the moment. So thank you very much for changing the slide. These are the experts that you're going to hear from today who will fill that picture out a little bit more for you and put detail to that basic summary that I've just provided. And we've also got representatives here from the 6 local government areas that make up the Goulburn Broken Catchment as well. So they won't speak today, but they are on hand to answer any questions if they come up. And then in today's session, across all of these different speakers and experts, we're going to touch on basically a situation update on the current outlook and some of the basics of emergency preparedness as just a bit of a general update. And we know from our in-person sessions, I know in Greater Shepparton we've had sessions, for example, in Mooroopna and Murchison and Shep as well, and other LGAs have had them as well, that the most important part of these sessions is often around questions and answers. So we're going to try and make sure we've got plenty of time at the end for questions and answers. And you'll be able to submit questions. We've received a few via email already. And then there's basically some functionality on this platform that will allow you to submit further questions. So I'll just move. Yep, fantastic. You've caught up with me beautifully. Different options for submitting questions and answers. Depending on the device that you're using, it can vary a little bit, but we're using the Q&A function on MS Teams, and it's really the most reliable way is from a desktop PC. But if that's a problem for you because you're using a different sort of a device or any other reason, you can also email your questions through and you'll get the same level of attention that you will if you're dropping in the chat. We're going to try and combine them up a little bit so that we're trying to address as many questions as possible rather than touching on the same sorts of questions repeatedly. And of course, invite you afterwards. If you've got questions that either we couldn't get to today or if you've got questions that come to you later on, you can also email them through to that address and the Goulburn Murray Water will get back to you. Okay, and then I think we're going to see a bit of a screenshot of the Q&A function as well. Thanks very much. So there's a bit of on the top menu, there's a Q&A function there. If you can click on that, there's a circle there that shows you what to look for. If you click on that, there'll be a bit of a side menu will pop out and you can submit your question directly at that point. Now, I think that is plenty from me just for the moment. So I'm going to hand over now for our first presentation, which is from Jonathan Pollock, who's a senior climatologist from the Bureau of Meteorology. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you, Louise. That was a good introduction. So there is a bit of flooding on the Murray at the moment, sort of downstream from the Goulburn, and a little bit of rain on the forecast for the northeast in the coming days, but generally pretty low amounts elsewhere, and it's a pretty dry forecast the week ahead for New South Wales. But most of what I'm going to be talking about today is beyond that 7-day forecast. Next slide, please, Klaus. We'll start by having a chat about what happened in June. So June was obviously very wet. That map on the left shows rainfall deciles. So those areas of blue shading corresponding to areas that had above average rainfall. And you can see it was quite an exceptional month for large parts of the state. Really, East Gippsland, the only area that was drier than average. And really, all that above average rainfall was a bit unexpected. So the models were sort of showing us that we were likely to have dry conditions during June. But off northwestern Australia, the waters up there remained a bit warmer than the model was expecting. And earlier in the month, we had some of that tropical moisture interacting with fronts as they crossed southern Australia. And then later in the month, we had these really dramatic northwest cloud bands sort of bringing above average rainfall all the way from the Kimberley right across the mainland and down into Tasmania. So it was the 7th wettest June on record for Victoria, and the 7th wettest June on record for South Australia. In the centre is a map showing maximum temperature deciles for June, and that white shading covering a lot of Victoria corresponds to pretty typical maximum temperatures for June, but you can see that for most other parts, they've got that yellow-orange shading corresponding to warmer than average or higher than average maximum temperatures. You can't see all of Australia there, but it was actually Queensland's warmest June on record. And then on the far right, we've got the minimum temperatures, which were warmer than average for most parts of the southeast, except some parts of northwest New South Wales and Queensland. Could we go to the next slide, please, Klaus? I beg your pardon, I'm not too sure what's happened with the slides to the colours on them. There's normally a bit more detail, but the maps still look pretty clear. It looks as though it's missing a bit of text, but I can explain it to you. So this map is showing the stream flow observations at the beginning of July after we'd had all that above average rainfall. And those dark blue dots, there are locations that had high stream flow. So you can see that's a lot of sites across northern Tasmania and Victoria, extending into New South Wales. Next slide, please. And then this was the forecast for July to September for stream flow. And you can see it's a bit like the slide we just saw with those observations. So stream flows show a lot of persistence. So even though what we're about to see is some dry outlooks for the months ahead, starting off with high flows in June sort of tips the odds towards seeing those high flows continue for the outlook period we're in now. If we could move again to the next slide. Thanks, Klaus. And so now here's the month we've just had, July, and it looks very different. So that rainfall map on the left, now you can see a lot of red shading corresponding to below average rainfall, covering Victoria and a lot of southern Australia. So for Victoria, we were 11th driest, so just missed out on one of those top 10 rankings, but quite a turnaround following that wet June. For temperatures, that map in the middle, you can see areas of highest on record across parts of eastern Victoria and southeastern New South Wales. New South Wales, Victoria, Tasmania, South Australia, all ranking in the top 10 warmest years on record for maximum temperatures for July. And some more minimum temperatures in parts too in that map on the left. Next slide, please. And now on this slide, the top half, we've got some charts that help explain what's happening out in the Pacific Ocean, what's happening with ENSO, the El Nino Southern Oscillation. So on the top left, what that chart, the dashed line there, is the observed sea surface temperatures in the Nino 3.4 region. And the Nino 3.4 region is an indicator that we monitor to show signs of whether or not we might be at La Nina or El Nino. And you can see at the end of last year, that dashed line was tracking in that blue shaded area corresponding to La Nina. And then it's been progressively warming through this year, through that white shaded area. And now it's poking into that pink El Nino territory. And then in front of that, there's a bunch of colourful lines, and they're the forecasts from the different international agencies. The bureaus is the red line, but we've also got the Canadian, the European, Japanese, French, and American models up there as well. And they're all in pretty good agreement that we're likely to see continued warming of that Nino 3.4 region, even further into sort of that El Nino territory as we move through winter into spring. Now, on the right-hand side of that is another line chart with the red line, and that's showing the observations for that Nino 3.4 region, sort of the latest weekly values up around 1 degrees warmer than average, and that's sort of clearly in the El Nino range. But what we haven't seen out in the Pacific is much of a response from the atmosphere yet. So it looks like we've got the right setup in the oceans for El Nino, but cloudiness, trade winds, and the difference in pressure are still looking mostly neutral. Now, below that, we've got some information about the Indian Ocean. And so out in the Indian Ocean, the models are expecting, or have been expecting for some time now, that we'll move into a positive Indian Ocean dipole phase. So that's all the colourful lines plotting a chart, charting a course through that orange zone. And there's generally good agreement between the models that will occur. And most of them also show sort of the event decaying towards the end of the year, which is pretty typical. Indian Ocean dipole events tend to break down when the monsoon trough enters the southern hemisphere around summertime. But now over on the right of that is the latest data for the Indian Ocean Dipole Index. And you can see that red line really has just been bouncing around in that white shaded area below the positive Indian Ocean dipole threshold. So even though the models have been telling us we're likely to have this positive Indian Ocean dipole event for a while now, we haven't really seen much evidence of that in sea surface temperatures in the ocean yet. Next slide, please, Klaus. And the reason why we spend so much time sort of fussing over these boxes in the ocean and these different indicators is because we know that the ENSO and the Indian Ocean dipole both have a relationship on rainfall and temperature patterns across Australia. Now, these maps aren't forecasts. These are maps that show the typical rainfall impacts during previous El Nino and positive Indian Ocean dipole events. And on the left is the typical rainfall impact during winter. And those red shaded areas correspond to parts that typically have below average rainfall. And on the right, it's the map for spring. And you can see that throughout winter and spring, Victoria, typically has below average rainfall when we have El Nino and positive Indian Ocean dipole. Next slide, please, Klaus. And now here we do have the actual forecasts, and they look pretty consistent with that prediction. So we'll start with the map on the far right, which is the map for rainfall. And this is the outlook for August. And it's showing that brown shading corresponds to areas that are likely to have below median rainfall. So you can see that's all of Victoria. And in fact, for parts of the northeast, that has that quite dark shading, less than 20% or almost 80% chance there of having below median rainfall for August. Now, the two red maps, the one on the far left is maximum temperature, and the one on the center is minimum temperature. And you can see they're both quite red, corresponding to high chances of above median temperatures. And these were the maps for August. We'll skip ahead now and we'll see the maps for spring. And you can see they're quite similar. Again, higher than average temperatures likely for both maximums and minimums for spring, September to November. And the rainfall outlook map there on the right, looking quite brown for most of Victoria as well as the rest of Eastern Australia. And that, again, if we think back to those slides we previously saw, those composite maps, it looks like the sort of typical impacts of a positive Indian Ocean dipole and El Nino. Thank you. Next slide. So another way we can sort of slice the outlook is to consider places that might be unusually wet or dry. And this map's showing the chance of being unusually dry or having unusually low rainfall. And this is for August, September to October, so the coming 3 months. And I apologise those labels haven't shown, but what it's showing is that most of Victoria has about double its normal chance of having rainfall in the lowest 20% of records for that 3-month period, except for East Gippsland, which has that sort of white shading. Next slide, please. And now this is the chance of having unusually high maximum temperatures. So maximum temperatures in the warmest 20% of the historical range. And you can see that for parts of the northeast, especially, there is an increased chance, almost sort of triple the normal likelihood of having unusually warm maximum temperatures. Next slide, please. And now this is the chance of having unusually high minimum temperatures. And again, you know, the pattern looks a bit different, but really the message is the same. Most parts of the state have that increased chance. Thanks, class. So really that's the end of my presentation. Hopefully the message for you is that overall, broadly speaking, we are expecting drier and warmer than average conditions in the months ahead. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jonathan. I'm sure that's extremely welcome news. I know it is very welcome news to us here in Greater Shepparton, and no doubt will be to others as well. And I appreciate the detail behind the climate science, as well as the quick kind of take-home message at the end that we can expect dry weather. Just before we finish up, I did note that there was a bit of distortion on the presentation throughout, but we will make this presentation available, I believe, through the Goulburn Murray Water website, as this entire session will be recorded and published on the website as well. So if you're interested to see the full detail, you'll be able to do that. And now I'll just hand over to Andrew Shields from Goulburn Murray Water for his presentation. Thanks.
Thanks, Louise. I thought I would just start with looking at the catchment map that we're talking about, the Goulburn system. We've got the Lake Eildon at the top of the catchment there, the Goulburn River then flowing to the west, heading towards Seymour, and then heading north towards where it meets the Murray River just upstream of Echuca. Lake Eildon itself comprises, or the catchment there comprises, about 23% of the total catchment, with the remaining 77% downstream of Eildon. There's a number of tributaries that flow into the Goulburn, particularly downstream of Eildon as well. We've got the main highlighted there, the Broken River, but also a number of tributaries, particularly between Eildon and Goulburn Weir, that can provide some significant flows into the river system. Just noting, in October last year, the majority of the water of the peaks that came through Seymour and Shepparton came from those tributaries around the Seymour region, particularly Sunday and Sugarloaf Creeks. We've also, key features of the Goulburn River system is we have Goulburn Weir at Nagambie, and also Warringah Basin. Warringah Basin's an off-stream storage there, where we harvest water from the catchment at Goulburn Weir and store it there, and that's then used for irrigation into the irrigation districts to the north and to the west. At Goulburn Weir, we usually have inflows there, usually just pass. It doesn't have a large storage capacity or ability to buffer flows through the system. At Warringah Basin, the levels are starting to rise there now, and we're transferring some additional water there as we're getting ready for the commencement of the irrigation season, which is due to start on the 15th of August. If you go to the next slide, please, Klaus. So this graph just shows the recent inflows into Lake Eildon and the storage releases, and also how the storage volume has changed over the last couple of months. And as Jonathan pointed out, we've had some reasonable rain through June, and that's, can see there in the inflows that have picked up through the first part of June, and we had inflows there of about 45,000 megalitres a day on one particular day in early June with that significant rainfall that we had. And what we've been able to do with the releases from Eildon is use the available airspace in the dam to be able to take the capture the peaks and then provide a slower flow through the river system. So you can see there that there's sort of 4 peaks above the volume of inflow, and we've seen the storage level bounce around a little bit in response to that. So we've been able to capture some of that water and then release it as those inflows have started to recede. The inflows that we received in June were about 3 times the monthly average. So just sort of following on from Jonathan's comments there about how wet June was. And you'll note there on the graph as well that as over the last few weeks, the inflows have been reducing into Eildon, and we've also been reducing our outflows as well, highlighted in the grey line there, just to start taking some pressure off the river, but also looking now to transition into how we manage the storage through August. So inflows today are about 2,500 megalitres a day, and those releases are at 3,000, and the dam's at 95% of capacity. Let me just go to the next slide, please, Klaus. So this graph shows that the storage volume at Eildon in blue compared to the filling targets for the storage in green. The filling targets for Eildon are used as a guide to determine when we need to make additional releases or consider making additional releases from the storage to manage the rate of fill. Releases from Eildon based on these filling targets have been occurring since April this year, and we're also operating to filling targets through the wetter period that we saw through 2022 as well, and releases started in August. In the filling targets in this graph were developed at the start of July, and with recent conditions, we'll now start to look at reviewing the targets for September and October. We'll review those early next week based on revised inflow forecasts and what potential demands we might see and how much water we might need to release from Lake Eildon to meet those demands, whether that be for irrigation or environmental water demands. We're anticipating that the storage volume will increase through August, just so we can get ready to start meeting those higher downstream demands. The filling targets can vary month to month as we respond to the conditions as they're changing. But the aim of the storage is to have it as close to full as possible when the demand for water from the storage or the amount we need to release to meet those demands exceeds the inflows to the storage. So really bring it up to full and then try and that's when it should start to fall. If we do see dry conditions eventuate and those demands emerge, the storage is highly likely to fall during spring, as those demands mean we need to release that water. We're currently planning with our colleagues at the Goulburn Catchment Management Authority to potentially deliver an environmental water high flow through commencing in mid-September. And that could see between 80 to 150,000 megalitres released from Eildon over a 3-week period. So we could start to see the storage draw down from that time. But through August, we'll continue to manage the storage subject to what inflows we get and again, how much water we need to release to meet those demands. We have had some questions come through about what will happen if we do get significant rain when the storage is full. So what we'll look to do there, if we do have a large rain event ahead of time, we can make releases from the dam to try and lower the storage before the inflows increase and try and create some additional airspace to help us buffer those flows as much as possible. So again, we'll just continue to monitor those forecast catchment conditions and then respond as best we can to try and keep the flows as low as possible. But as Jonathan mentioned, we've with the drier outlooks ahead and that sort of thing, and if this is the start of an extended dry spell, having stored water is critical for future water supply for all of those who rely on water from the Goulburn system. We've also had a couple of questions around why we haven't continued to make releases to get closer to that 94% target there that was on the 1st of August. And this is where being able to adapt to changing conditions is really important. So as inflows have been reducing and there hasn't been any significant rain in the forecast, we've been able to ease those releases from the dam and get the river back to below 10,000 megalitres a day, because we know that's been having some challenges for people downstream. So we can take the pressure off the river a little bit there and enable us to transition the storage level management into where we need to take the storage through August. Next slide there, please. So this graph just shows flows in the river at particular locations along the Goulburn. So we've got the grey there is what the release is from Eildon. In the yellow, the orange colour, that's the flow at Murchison, just downstream of Goulburn Weir. In the blue is the flow at Shepparton, and the green is the flow at McCoy's Bridge, which is the last measurement site before the Goulburn joins the Murray. You see there through those higher flows that we've seen along the Goulburn, flows up to 25,000 megalitres per day at Shepparton. You can see there the contributions that are made from those tributaries downstream of Eildon and what they're being providing into the river system downstream of the dam. Again, we can see those with the river levels there are starting to ease as those tributary flows are falling, but also as those lower releases from Eildon are starting to make their way through the system. And that's the next slide, please, Klaus. And just to round off my section, we'll just touch on Loch Garry. So during the October 22 floods, there was quite a bit of damage to the levee system that forms the Loch Garry Flood Protection District, which is located just downstream of Shepparton. And the works there that have been required to repair those levee breaches are now complete. So a nice photo there of the completed works. I think that was all from me. Just the last one, just to cover off on, for further information, we do have updated information around our storage releases, some fact sheets around how we're managing our storages at the moment are available on the website as well. But also, if you're looking for information about storage levels, there's some links there, and also the Bureau of Meteorology website, plus where you can get information about some of the streamflow data. That's all from me.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Andrew. That was another extremely informative presentation. I'll leave it there. Won't harp on too much, but just hand over to Guy Tierney at this point for his presentation. Thanks.
Thanks, Louise. Just got 4 short slides, then I'm going to do a demonstration. Now, just to let you know what's happening in the space pertaining to the Goulburn River system from Eildon to Echuca. First of all, we do have this thing called the Flood Intelligence Project, where we're working with VKSES and the local government to go back through all the flood studies to make sure all information is extracted out of that and actually informs what we call the municipal flood emergency plans. It's a document which sets out flood intelligence and things to do, and looks at river heights and consequences. So it's forward planning, making sure those plans are up to date. So that's in train at the moment. And also been updating quite a lot of number of local flood guides. Flood guides are those simple documents for community use. We have them for Seymour, Yea, Murchison and Shepparton on the Goulburn. I'm not sure, there's probably one for Echuca, I'm not sure, which is just outside our area. So that's I'm not going to steal the thunder, VKSES. Jules will touch on about those local flood guides in more detail later, but we are updating the municipal plans and local flood guides. Next slide. Klaus, thank you. Just to give you a heads up what's been going on in terms of studies, I just want to start on the left-hand side. I don't know if you can see the word in the bottom left of Kilmore. So that study's been complete and the mapping is available. The other one going across is what we call the Flowerdale area or King Parrot Creek. That flood study is complete. And also the Akron Valley, Buxton, Marysville and Taggady, and also the rural areas in between. What's in train is what we call the Goulburn Broken River flood study. That's in train going from Ilden down to Lochgarry and Nillicooty down to Lochgarry, which is the big undertaking that's happening. Future studies we're looking at doing, which is on the list, is the Murrindindi and Yea River, the rural areas down to Yea and through to the Goulburn and the lower Kingparrot Creek area. And the other one, which we've been in train for a number of years, is what called the Sunday Creek catchment, which includes the Sugarloaf and Dry Creek, Sunday Creek, and the likes. All those red areas there. You've got Pylong and Rawford, Wandong, Heathcote Junction, all those sorts of areas will be included. That's sort of upstream. Looking downstream, next slide, off Seymour, what's happening in the space is all those on the left are listed, which are complete. The Lower Goulburn, the Shepparton, Root, Kyla areas, Murchison. Other studies which have been complete, which is surrounding the areas, is Kyburn, Nagambie, Nathalie, Namerkin, Merrickham, Shep East, and Tatura. So there was a lot there which got quite a lot of information available. Moving on, finally, just to touch on the last slide, getting in perspective some of the Andrew Shields comment about the bulk of the water sort of hit the Sugarloaf, Sunday Creek catchment around Seymour. This sort of demonstrates that on the right hand side we have Seymour. It's sort of the annual exceedance probability of 1 in 80 annual AEP. So it's quite a large flood, whereas Ilden to Trawall, which is slightly upstream of Seymour, we got an event much lower than 1 in 27 annual exceedance probability. And going downstream of the Goulburn system to Shepparton is all relatively large, you're pushing around 1 in 80 to 1 in 100 in that sort of order, which demonstrates the flows coming out of Ilden and the 2022 event sort of came after the peak. And that's all I want to say in terms of what's existing information, what happened in 22. So I just want to move on into the flood intelligence portal where people can extract useful information, but these are around the urban centres, which then I'll go touch on about the rural areas afterwards. So I'm going to try and share my screen because I'm going to try and attempt to do this live. And so the experience you're going to see here is the experience you will see at home. Look, I'm going to assume we know nothing about this flood information portal, but the best way to get there, if you don't know, if you think what our organisation name is, Goulburn Catchment Management Authority, and just type those letters into Google, GBCMA, and hit enter, then you get a hit. Okay, we've got the Goulburn Catchment Management Authority here. Let's hit onto that. There's our home page. On the front of the home page, you don't have to navigate very far. Under the floodplain section, the last bullet point is called the Community Flood Intelligence Portal. So click onto that, and it gives you a bit of a blurb. And we're going to be updating an instructional video soon, which will be available here, much more improved one. So have a look at that once it's there. But I'm going to try and demonstrate that here today. This says you can click anywhere on the map to launch the portal. So I'll click anywhere on that lower map. So it's loading, and it's loading the portal, the Community Flood Intelligence Portal. Just a point while it's loading, always watch this wheel. Okay, we'll talk about that in a minute. But the partners to make this possible is the Greater Shepparton Council, Benalla Rural City Council, Moira Shire, Stratburgh Shire, Mitchell Shire, and Murrindindi Shire. We all work in collaboration and partnership to make this website possible, and it's been a really fantastic collaboration to make flood information available for our communities to try and make a difference. And I do say it's worth looking at these portals way in advance of floods so you can prepare. I'm going to do two examples today. I'm going to do a real simple one. You can zoom in and out using these buttons here, or you can use your scroll mouse in and out with your scroll. There's different ways you can navigate around. Let's go to, you can go to Mitchell Shire, for instance, hit that. At the moment in Mitchell, we only have one available called Seymour, or you can click on the yellow. Anywhere yellow, you can click and launch. I'll do that now for what it's worth. Okay, this is what happens when you do things live. Okay, so it's launched. So once it's launched, you can click on it again, then you get a bit of a blurb, and what this blurb tells you what the maps can do, view maps. Interestingly, this bullet point's really important relative. You can show maps relative to the flood gauge if it's available. It's very useful for when the Bureau of Meteorology give gauge predictions, so you can go to the right map and see what the consequences are for that gauge height prediction. Really useful. You can search for a property of interest, and you can download a property report, which gives you what we call a flood preparedness information, amongst other things. So if you want to read the terms and conditions, you can by clicking here, but let's just proceed for the Seymour space. So while it's doing that, it's loading all the gridded information, and you can get a warning here. Please be patient while the flood grids load, or flood grids means flood information, and you get guided by these circles. While that's loading, I'm just going to tell you what this menu is all about. All of flood information is in terms of depth, that you can't change that, but the selection is really important. It's always defaults to the 1 in 100 for planning reasons, but if you scroll your mouse over the I button, it tells you where available, display flood maps by gauge height, design, or historical events. So it gives you a bit of a hint. Oh yeah, we might have some gauge height, which in times of flood, that's what we want to look at. If the drop down list gives you options. You can scroll to the gauge heights, or planning purpose for 1 in 100 or different events. So let's say the Bureau's issued a prediction around 8.38. So we can click on the 8.38, and that's all you need to do. And every time you make a change, hint, always refresh map. So at the moment, it's default to the 1 in 100. Before I do that, I just want to talk about a couple of other features on this website. This is the code here. It tells you what the indicative depths of flooding are in shades of blue. And you have this, I mentioned before, the plus or minus to zoom in. And you got this, you can select different layers, base map layers, photography. I'm going to zoom just zoom in a little bit more. And as you zoom in, it's loading up more refined grid, so it looks a little bit better. So I'm just going to let that load up. Okay, I'm going to change it to aerial imagery, so you get a bit of this. There's the Whitehead's Creek and the hospital in here. I'm just going to, you can, I've got a hand, so if you've got a hand, that means you can right click and just pull them up anywhere, any direction you like. I'm just going to refresh map now. I'm going to select a property for interrogation. While I'm doing that, it's always good to have a look at the full floodplain in the out zoom to give you an idea what the flood depth is across the floodplain. In the Seymour example, Seymour is pretty well entrenched. It's pretty deep right across the entire floodplain, and when you get to the edge, this is where you climb out of a floodplain. It goes from very dark blue to light blue. So the characteristics of a Seymour floodplain, for a 1 in 20 or 1 in 100, the flood extent doesn't change much, but the depth changes radically. A couple of ways you can do this. You can click on any property and you can search for floodplain report, but instead, let's start typing in an address. Let's say 48. As you see, it auto-populates, so you don't have to type much. You get to the address. So now it's highlighted your selected property of interest. You can see it's all in probably greater than a metre, but I'm interested in what the consequences about overflow flooding. So this is where you can go and download a property report. So it's actually, what's it doing now? It's actually going back to the underlying data, extracting all the flood height information, depth information, and creating a report. And there it is. I'm not going to go too much into this report, except to say this first table on the first page is all about design events for land use planning and building, and also trying to price insurance. Gives you a bit of a mud map of the 1% case, but more importantly, this is what we call the flood preparedness table, and probably not a good example. The next example will be better. So this one probably doesn't have a floor level. It's got a non-applicable. Ordinarily, if you have a floor level, it takes the difference between your water level at the site and your floor level, and it comes up with the depth of water over your floor. So the example I've chosen is not a good one, but the next one will be. I'd like to demonstrate that. So that's all I want to demonstrate there. and just close that and go back to this. A couple of icons on the top here, just want to demonstrate. You can see more real estate on the map. You can close the menu on and off. If you're on a mobile device, you have to turn that on to get this menu up and down. But if you're on a desktop computer, that automatically loads. This grand home takes you to the home page of the portal where you get the entire GBCMA, Goulburn Catchment Authority. But I just want to demonstrate very quickly the Shepparton experience because it's quite unique, because it has to take into account of the dominance or the major influence of flooding, being will the majority of flooding come down the Goulburn system, or will it come down the Broken system? 93 is an example of the Broken. 2022 is an example where the majority of water came down the Goulburn River system. So this case, I'm going to assume is going to be 12.1, similar to the 2022 event. And once you select the gauge height, you've got to tell it what the dominant case is. We know it came down the Goulburn system, and there you go. Before I refresh map, I'm going to zoom in just north of the Broken River. Look at another example. Go to my base layers, turn on the Vic map layer. There you go. I don't know if you know Shepparton. This is the main drag into Shepparton past Victoria Lake. The Broken River and Goulburn system slowing up the grids. Here we go. Got a road here, a local school called Godfrey Street. There's a property in here I'm interested in. Let's rather than writing an address in here, I'm just going to demonstrate how this works by simply zooming in, move across, find your property, and there it is. I reckon that's it. You can recognise it by the swimming pool at the back. So it's highlighted by merely selecting is highlighted in a red polygon around this particular address. Quickly download a report. Which takes about 10 seconds or so. There you go, and there it is, downloading, and there. So I'll go straight to the preparedness table. As you know, the one in question is the Goulburn dominant. That's a major source of flooding, 12.1. So in the maximum water elevation, that's the number minus your floor level information. And this time we know it's minus 0.36 or 360 millimeters below floor level. So it looks like I'm going to be safe during this flood. Let's say the Bureau of Meteorology says it's going to be equal distribution from the in terms of magnitude from the Broken and the Goulburn system. We call it a neutral event at 12.1, still safe. But if you get closer to the 12.3, then you see the red number in the table. Anyway, not just Shepparton, it could be Benalla, Euroa. Get a red number, that means overflow flooding. So that's the end of the presentation in terms of how you use the flood intelligence portal and your flood preparedness tables. But the question was asked quickly about what happens if you're not in those areas where you got rich information. Well, simply the thing I recommend, just open another tab very quickly. If you just follow this example, there's only probably three slides left to go, and I'll finish. The thing called Vic Plan. If you Google Vic Plan, it takes you to the Victorian Spatial map share. Let's have a look. I'll try and click on Vic Plan. Hopefully that works. So please wait loading. And I agree. So let's do this quickly. I'll start with the Goulburn River, just downstream of Shepparton and between Echuca and Shepparton. So here's my starting point. Using the three tabs at the top, which thing called map and layer list. So what I want to load, this is from a planning system, is just the overlay controls called the floodway overlay and land cementation overlay. Most people won't know this, but those are overlays in the planning system lives under land management. So if I open the land management with this, if you tick it on, you're going to activate it. I'm going to activate the floodway overlay and activate LSIO, land cementation overlay. And with a bit of luck, they should load. There you go. So this gives you a coverage of the expected flood extent for quite a large flood, being around about a 1%. So in the absence of no information, this gives you a bit of an idea where you are. And with this, you can just go up the valley and have a look, see what the floodplain looks like. So the Goulburn River floodplain upstream of Shepparton is generally confined to the valley margins, and the flood extent doesn't change that much with the magnitude of flooding. So there you go. You then again can scroll in, you can do the same thing, you write an address and so forth. So that's the sort of information where you don't know about other rich portal flood rich information. So on that note, I conclude and I will sign off. Thank you for that, Louise.
No problem at all, Guy. Thank you. And it's very, I think, useful information, and particularly for those in rural areas, that final part of the demonstration should be of great interest. Now, I know that we're moving pretty quickly towards time. We do have SES coming up, but would just note for those who might be interested, we actually haven't received any questions yet, and I'm sure you would have some. So if you want to submit some now, just that we could quickly move through at the end, we could do that, or if you prefer to email them to yoursay@gmwater.com.au, whether now or after the session. The Goulburn Murray Water have committed to get back to anyone who wants to submit a question that way. So it's possible we'll finish up well and truly on time, and just now welcome our final presenter, who's Jules Syme from Vic SES, to give a little bit of an update on warnings and the basics of EM preparedness. Thanks very much, Jill.
Thank you. I'm just going to follow on from Guy and from Jonathan and just talk about, so if I just go to that next slide, please. Thanks. So where do our warnings come from? So we get our warnings from the BOM, so the Bureau of Meteorology. And for people that actually have an interest in understanding, you can actually use that BOM website to actually find river data, the levels, and you can actively monitor your local catchment. So with our warnings, as I said, they came from the BOM. So we get the warning and then we publish them. We put them, they're distributed on our website, and they're also put onto the social media platforms as well. So that's when you can find them all there. We also have a time frame of which we have to publish them and get them out. And if you also have a look, the website also has an app. So it's the hotline you can phone, and you can also press 9 for interpreters to hear the warning. So if you find the written information complex, or if you have a hearing impairment, you can actually just click on go through there to actually get a list of the warnings. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, it's also important that we understand warnings so we can actually act and do things about them. So the Australian warning system has changed, and what they've actually done, because different agencies had different warnings, to make it easier for general public, they've got 3 levels, and they go through an icon, and it will just have, depending on the event, of what icon that may be. So if I have a look at this one, this is the emergency warning. So this is the highest one. So there's the 3 levels. So this is an emergency warning, is the highest level of warning. So you may be in danger and need to take action immediately. So any delay now puts your life at risk. So, and that's in the red. So if you follow that, if we go to the next slide, if you have a look at this one, this is the watch and act. So this is actually orange, because I'm not sure how well the colour's coming out there. So there's a heightened level of threat, conditions are changing, and you need to start taking action now to prevent you and your family, protect them. Okay, and also when we have a look at a warning, it's really, if you hear a warning, it's really important that you actually stay calm, stop what you're doing, and actually pay attention. So, and if you don't understand the warning, get someone to explain by asking your neighbours or friends, and follow the advice of the warnings immediately. So people die or are put in danger because they haven't responded straight away. If you keep in contact with family members to also know what's going on there, and make sure you know what is happening and what you plan to do, stay informed and keep listening. So next slide, please. So, and then this is just an advice message. So the advice message is yellow, and which means an incident has started. There is no immediate danger, but stay up to date and in case the situation changes. So you just need to be mindful of that, and that's in yellow. And you'll notice that those three icons had different things inside them. And so what that means is it would just have, depending on if it's a bushfire or flood or storm, that the part in the middle will actually just change to say what it actually is. So next slide, please. So this is actually a watch and act, so it's in orange. So this is a flood warning. So this was for the Goulburn. So what the warnings do, so this is being published on the social media from the Vic Emergency. It actually gives, the warning gives you the details of where the impacts are and what the likely impacts will be. It also gives you what level it's at, so that as in the watch and act, and what time the next warning will be issued. And this is this is a warning for riverine flooding. So it's relatively high water levels, overflow above the banks of a stream or a river. And depending on the local landscape, some floods may pass quickly, while others, as we've seen previously, move slowly, and they can actually last for quite a long time. So, sorry, next slide, please. Thank you. Now, when should we call the SES? So we have a number, the 132500 number. So that's the number you call for us. If you have a life-threatening emergency, you actually need to phone 000. But for SES, and we've got a little sheet there, and because this is going to be actually petarded, you'll be able to get this information from your local SES unit or the regional office as well of when you should call. It's also down on our website that you can also follow it too. So it's pretty easy to follow as far as in when you actually call us when you need assistance. Next slide, please. The important part too is also knowing your risk. So this is just, we've got a couple of areas here. We've got Mitchell Shire and we've also got Murrindindi. So that's just showing you from under Mitchell Shire, the local flood guide for Seymour. And Guy spoke about that earlier. So and I'll go into a bit more detail in regards to local flood guides just a little bit later. But so the Mitchell Shire Council area sits within the Goulburn River floodplain, and it's at risk of significant flooding. So Seymour has experienced a number of major floods, so going back through from 1847. It's also, because of the flooding, it's actually caused the town's commercial centre to be moved 3 times. And the Goulburn River catchment, which drains towards Seymour, obviously encompasses quite a few of the creeks, and I won't read them out because we're obviously under a bit of time as well. Okay, if we go to the next slide, please. And again, so this is just showing for Murrindindi. So, and this is the Yea local flood guide. So most of the Murrindindi Shire is hilly with some major mountains within the area, making some areas vulnerable to flash flooding after heavy rain in the steep upper catchments. Lake Eildon, often referred to as Eildon Weir, is located on the eastern boundary of the Shire, and it was built in 1956. It controls most water flows of the upper Goulburn River for irrigation. Although not designed for flood mitigation, it has reduced the impact and frequency of minor to moderate flooding along the lower Goulburn River. Next slide, please. Okay, so now just some things that you can actually do to prepare yourself and make yourself safe. So simple plan to residents is, and how to be more resilient. So keeping an eye on water levels, knowing what to do, and using sandbags in a more practical way. So instead of having to build the Taj Mahal, we say bag it, block it, lift it, and leave. Next slide. And what's your plan? So this is just showing you, the first part of it is our flood flip chart, which has it's a magnet. You can sit it on your fridge. It's actually got information on before, during, and after. It also has an area to put emergency numbers and stuff on it. It's just a very handy piece of tool. The other part is the Red Cross preparedness and things that you can fill out to what happens with you, and I'll go into that. If you go to the next slide, please. So a home emergency plan. So having we say about emergencies can happen at any time with little warning, and people who plan and prepare emergencies reduce the impact and recover faster. So, and that's what experience shows us. And the other part too is having a plan, but also testing your plan. So depending on where your family is, where your children are, and where you are at the time of the emergency, you may be separated. So it is really important to have a plan and test that plan. So if you're working and then there's something closer to your home and your children are there, knowing what to do in those sort of things. So if, there's some simple practical steps in the Red Cross Ready plan that you can actually go through. And it's a great exercise to sit with the family and actually go through those, go through your plan so everybody understands them. Okay, next slide, please. And a home emergency kit. This is a really important to throw some items into a bag or into a box, whatever you have, and have them and be at least prepared for at least 72 hours of being isolated from your home if you need to leave. So it's about having those important documents. It's about thinking about no power, so having batteries, having a wind-up radio so you can still keep informed. Putting in some, we obviously know flood water is, we don't know what is contained in it. So it's also important to maybe have some what we call protective clothing and items, some hand sanitizer, some gloves and some bits and pieces, and have it handy where you can grab it at any stage and prepare to go. We often say to people, throw some bottles of water in it, have a couple of canned food because obviously that doesn't date, and having those items already just so if you have to get out quick, you've got it already there. Take photos of your licenses, your mortgage, your anything that's really important documentation that that you've actually got that you can show people. Okay, the next one, please. And we say about do one thing. So if I could say to anybody, please, it's a free app. Go on and download the Victorian emergency map. You can also have a look at the traffic apps, but you can set these up where it can have different points. So you could put if you've got elderly parents, you can have an app. You can show a area for those, your own home, your workplace, if you have a holiday house, whatever, you can set them up for that. Just be mindful of what you actually tick so you don't get woken up all hours of the night with all the different types of emergencies coming through. So if I can say one thing, please do yourself and download that. Okay, next slide. Some local resources. So we spoke about the local flood guides and you saw a couple of photos of those earlier. And Guy also spoke about the municipal storm flood emergency plan. So they're on the website for the councils and they're also on our SES website as well, same as the local flood guides. The local flood guides, it provides you with current information about the risk of floods within that local area. And the guides are for residents to gain an understanding of the risk. So if you move into an area, so you actually have an understanding of what may be, what that risk may be around you and how you can plan, prepare and respond during flooding. Some of the things, it might be even where the infrastructure and different roads that may be impacted. So if you've got a planned route, it actually can assist you better in that way. We talk about the Municipal Storm Flood Emergency Plan, which is at councils, and that's detailed arrangements agreed for the planning, preparedness, prevention, response, and briefly recovery from flood incidents. And that's what all the agencies work off when we're actually, going through an incident. But it is very good to be able to have a look at it. Gives you flood intel, gives you a lot of information. It is a fairly large document, but you can actually just follow the indexes and have a look there. There's also the SES website to go to and grab information from that, and also your local SES units. So that would be Alexandra, and you've also got Seymour. There's a few other, depending on the area that you're in, but have a look at those, and you can also look at on the website for your regional office and contact the members there. So thank you very much, and that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jill. Really appreciate it. We don't have a lot of questions, but we do have one on the right-hand side that's for Guy Tierney. So we'll just throw to you, Guy. I just noticed that the 1 in 100 flood was being used. I thought the sector had moved to a percentage chance. Is this going to change? Thanks, Guy.
Very good question, and very topical. Long and short of it, we've decided to move away from a 1 in 100 average recurrence interval. It's all about probability and chance. So you are right. We have now adopted that. So if you say a 1% annual exceedance probability is exactly as saying a 1 in 100 annual exceedance probability. It's a chance. So it's a bit of it looks like a bit of a mixture of the old language and the new language, but in actual fact, the 1 in 100 AEP is exactly the same as 1% AEP. But trouble is, when you look at larger floods, like a 1 in 500 and 1 in 1,000, so when you say 1 in 1,000 AEP, it's a lot easier to understand than say 0.02 or 00 point. Lots of the zeros and gets very confusing. So we've made a decision to adopt the probability in terms of 1 in 100 followed by the AEP, but we're not using any more the annual recurrence interval terminology.
Thanks, Guy. Hopefully, Bob, that's answered your question. I might just leave a minute for any other questions to come through. There is, of course, that email there, just based on other information sessions. Usually there is a lot of questions. So it's hopefully that means that these really comprehensive presentations have answered some that you might have brought with you today. But if not, we'll have that ability to coordinate answers in the back end and then come back to you. I'm not seeing any more come through. So that's probably a bit of a timely junction to thank everyone for your interest in the session, and obviously thank our presenters as well, and acknowledge that we will be making this presentation available to the agencies who have presented today to publish on the websites, chiefly Goulburn Murray Water, but also Goulburn Murray Catchment Authority, Vic SES as well. So I would just like to thank you at this point for your interest and wish you a very good rest of the afternoon. Thank you. Bye.